Drop a comment below, and let me introduce myself. Hey, I'm Benjamin Carter, but everyone calls me Ben. At 35 years old, I thought I'd seen it all. After 12 years as a medical helicopter pilot, including 4 tours in Afghanistan and countless life-or-death rescues, I'd faced enough adrenaline-pumping moments to last a lifetime. But nothing and not one thing had prepared me for the battlefield that was Willowbrook Estates, and its self-appointed ruler, Beverly Hutchinson. This story started on a seemingly normal Tuesday night but ended with me questioning everything I thought I knew about suburban life. It was 11:15 p.m., and I'd just returned home from a grueling 14-hour shift. 3 medical evacuations, 2 trauma calls, and 1 nasty car crash that had me airborne for nearly 6 hours straight. My body was drained, my eyes burning, and all I wanted was to crack open a cold beer and crash in bed. Instead, there I was, bent over in my garage, wrestling with my temperamental lawnmower, which had chosen that exact moment to die on me. The engine gave off a strange grinding sound like a walrus gasping its last breath as I got grease deep in my elbow trying to figure out what had gone wrong. The garage door was open to let in some fresh air, and the usual suburban evening sounds floated through Willowbrook Estates. Somewhere off in the distance, a dog barked at something unseen. The Hendersons' TV blasted too loudly. As usual, Mrs. Chen was practicing piano despite the late hour, all perfectly normal for a Tuesday night in the suburbs. Then, I heard something that made my blood run cold, as something that triggered every survival instinct I'd developed in combat and emergency medicine. It wasn't just any noise. It was the unmistakable sound of someone in serious trouble. At first, I thought it was Dr. Rose Bennett moving furniture around in her house across the street. The 70-year-old retired cardiologist was known for her late-night home projects, much to the annoyance of our homeowners association president. But then I heard it again, a muffled thud, followed by a faint cry for help. Every fiber of my being, every lesson learned in combat medicine, every moment of training snapped me into action. I dropped my wrench, wiped my hands on my jeans, and jogged across the street to Dr. Rose's front door. "Dr. Rose?" I called, pressing my ear against the door. Silence. I knocked harder. "Dr. Rose, are you okay?" Still nothing. But I could swear I heard labored breathing from inside. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I hurried around to the side of her house, where I knew she kept a spare key hidden under a fake rock, but the key wasn't there. Panic crept in as I peered through the living room window. There she was, collapsed on the floor beside her favorite armchair, clutching her chest with one hand. Without hesitation, I grabbed a decorative garden stone and smashed the window. Glass shattered everywhere as I carefully climbed through. My military training kicked in automatically, scanning for other threats, while my medical instincts assessed the situation. Dr. Rose was unconscious but breathing, though shallow and irregular. Her lips had a bluish tint I recognized instantly. I'd seen it too many times, both in Afghanistan and on the job. A cardiac event, probably a heart attack. I dropped to my knees, checked her pulse, weak and thready, and immediately called 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. "This is Ben Carter at 1520 Maple Street, Willowbrook Estates. I have an unconscious 70-year-old female, possible cardiac event, pulse weak, breathing labored, patient unresponsive." As I relayed the details, I positioned Dr. Rose into the recovery position and began monitoring her vitals. The dispatcher assured me an ambulance was en route, with an ETA of 12 minutes. 12 minutes felt like an eternity, but I'd been through worse. What I didn't know was those 12 minutes were about to become the longest of my life, all thanks to the Queen Bee of Willowbrook Estates. I stayed by Dr. Rose's side, talking to her even though she was unconscious, checking her breathing and pulse every few minutes. Time crawled, each second stretching like an hour. That's when I remembered something she told me 6 months ago when I first moved here. Her grandson Tommy was now an emergency medicine doctor. She was so proud when she shared how Tommy had survived a horrific bus accident 20 years earlier, all thanks to a quick-thinking helicopter pilot who got him to the hospital just in time. The irony wasn't lost on me. As minutes ticked by, I heard sirens growing closer. Thank God, I thought, help was almost here. But then I noticed something that made my heart drop. The main gate to Willowbrook Estates was electronically controlled and locked every night at 10 p.m. for security. The ambulance would have to get through that gate. I pulled out my phone to call the security company when footsteps echoed behind me coming from the direction of the homeowners association. The office lights were still blazing despite it being well past 11:30 p.m. Then, from the shadows, her silhouette appeared moving with the confident stride of someone who believed she ruled the world. Beverly Hutchinson, the self-proclaimed queen of our neighborhood, approached the main gate, remote control in hand. She wore a smile so cold it could freeze fire itself. The ambulance sirens were growing louder, probably less than 2 minutes away, but Beverly emerged like some suburban villain from a nightmare. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, not a strand out of place despite the late hour. Clad in her power suit, she looked like a general ready for battle. In her hand, the remote control for the only gate wide enough for emergency vehicles. Her stance was deliberate, blocking the gate with unmistakable intent. I knew immediately what this meant. "Mrs. Hutchinson," I called, jogging toward her, trying to keep my tone steady. "There's a medical emergency. Dr. Rose is having a heart attack. The ambulance needs access. Please open the gate." She looked at me with the kind of disdain reserved for someone who just stepped on your pristine white carpet. Glancing at her expensive watch, she shook her head slowly, like a disappointed teacher. "Mr. Carter, I'm afraid that's impossible. County regulations strictly prohibit emergency vehicles from entering residential areas between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. due to noise restrictions. It's right there in the HOA handbook, section 12b. I stared, hoping I'd misunderstood. "Ma'am, this is a life or death situation. Dr. Rose could die without immediate care." At that moment, the ambulance came into view, lights flashing and sirens wailing, but stopped dead at the locked gate. Beverly's smile widened, a cold, calculated expression that sent a chill down my spine. "Mr. Carter, rules exist for a reason. If we make exceptions for every emergency, where would it end? Dr. Rose should have planned better for her health. Besides, I'm sure it's not as serious as you think." Then Beverly pulled out her phone and started recording me. "I'm documenting this for the HOA board. Mr. Carter is yelling and making threats while I'm simply enforcing community guidelines." I wasn't yelling, but desperation was creeping into my voice. "Mrs. Hutchinson, please. A woman is dying. She's unconscious, barely breathing. Every second counts." Beverly raised a hand like a stop sign. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Carter?" "Because I'm recording everything." Aggressive behavior towards a board member can result in immediate action. While we argued, precious minutes slipped away. Paramedics on the other side of the gate tried to communicate, but they couldn't get their equipment through. I tried again, voice shaking with urgency. "I'll take full responsibility. Pay any fines, handle any complaints. Just open the gate." Her smile turned wider, almost cruel. "Oh, you'll definitely be dealing with complaints, Mr. Carter. This disruption won't be forgotten, but rules are rules and no exceptions." She called the private security company monitoring the area. "This is Beverly Hutchinson, HOA president. We have an unauthorized emergency vehicle trying to enter without clearance." Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was exhaustion from my shift, or memories of bureaucracy blocking life-saving work in Afghanistan, or maybe just basic human decency. I couldn't stand there and watch Dr. Rose die because of one woman's ego trip. "Fine," I ground out through clenched teeth. "If you won't let them in, I'll bring her out myself." I sprinted back to Dr. Rose's house, carefully lifting her unconscious form, and started the treacherous 400-meter trek to the back gate. It was raining, a cold autumn drizzle turning everything slick and miserable. Carrying a 70-year-old woman that far without jostling her was like navigating a devil's obstacle course. My legs burned, my back screamed, and every step felt like I was failing her more. Behind me, I could hear Beverly's voice, probably recording every moment for her little vendetta file on anyone who crossed her. Paramedics met me halfway at the back gate, swiftly transferring Dr. Rose to their gurney. For 30 terrifying seconds, her heart stopped. 30 seconds that stretched into an eternity as they fought to revive her. They brought her back, but I could see it in their eyes. We had lost precious time. Time that could have saved her if not for Beverly's power trip. As the ambulance sped away, lights fading into the distance, I turned to see Beverly still standing there in the rain, phone raised, recording. "Thank you for the footage, Mr. Carter," she said with that same icy smile. "The HOA board will find this very interesting during your disciplinary hearing. Breaking and entering, destruction of property, threatening a board member, creating a public disturbance looks like serious violations to me." She paused, studying my face like savoring a fine wine. "I hope you enjoyed being a hero tonight because it's going to cost you dearly." With that, she turned and strode back toward the HOA office, her heels clicking on the wet pavement tail like a countdown to my doom. Soaked to the bone and emotionally drained, I stood there in the rain and realized that this was far from over. Beverly Hutchinson had just declared war on the wrong man. She might have ruled this little suburban kingdom with an iron fist, but she had never faced an opponent with my particular set of skills. I looked up at the overcast sky, heard a distant whir of helicopter rotors from the hospital landing pad across town, and smiled for the first time all night. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The envelope bore the unmistakable HOA letterhead, at the kind that screams, "Your life is about to get complicated," before you even break the seal. My hands were still sore from gripping the helicopter controls after an 8-hour shift, but nothing compared to the ache tightening my chest as I prepared to read what was inside. The letter, typed neatly on official HOA stationery and signed in Beverly Hutchinson's elegant script, laid out 4 distinct violations that apparently crowned me public enemy number 1 in suburban America. According to Beverly's legal masterpiece, I was guilty of unauthorized entry, her way of describing how I broke Dr. Rose's window to save her life. There was destruction of property, threatening and intimidating a board member, violating noise ordinances by causing a disturbance after quiet hours, and my personal favorite, creating a dangerous precedent for emergency protocols. The letter explained that I had accumulated 8 points out of a possible 10 on their violation scale. Hit 10 points, and you lose the right to live in Willowbrook Estates. The fine was $3,000, payable within 30 days, and I was required to attend a disciplinary hearing the following Friday. But what really caught my attention wasn't the threats or the fine, it was how the letter was crafted. The technical language, the flawless formatting, the electronic signature at the bottom. For months, I'd been receiving emails from the HOA, and recently, I'd noticed something odd. Official emails now included digital signatures and embedded metadata that hadn't been there before. Having spent 6 months in Afghanistan working with intelligence officers and learning about digital communications, these details screamed something's off. I decided to dig deeper: social media, neighborhood forums, anywhere I could find dirt on past HOA disputes in Willowbrook Estates. What I uncovered made my blood boil. Over the past 3 years, 5 families had sold their homes and left town after disputes with Beverly: the Millers, the Johnsons, the Patels, the O'Connors, and most recently, the Washingtons. Each case followed the same pattern: minor violations, escalating fines, harassment, and eventually, they gave up and left. Here's the kicker: I cross-checked sale dates with public records and found that in 3 out of those 5 cases, the houses were snapped up below market value by people with family ties to Beverly or other HOA board members. The Washingtons' house went to Beverly's cousin for $40,000 less than appraisal. The Millers' property sold to the treasurer's nephew for $60,000 under market price. It was a suburban real estate scheme, and Beverly was the mastermind. But the real smoking gun came when I started investigating the HOA's email system. I'm no tech expert, but back in Afghanistan, I learned a few digital tricks from a guy named Rodriguez. These recent emails weren't sent from the HOA's official server, they were forwarded from a personal account to the official address, then automatically deleted. Clever, but not clever enough. Someone with administrative access was manipulating the HOA's emails, and only one person had both the access and the skills: Beverly Hutchinson. That evening, Officer David Torres knocked on my door. We'd met a few times at neighborhood barbecues, and he seemed like a good guy, the kind of cop who became an officer to actually help people. "Ben, I heard about Dr. Rose. That was something carrying her all that way." I offered him coffee, and we sat on the front porch. I got straight to the point. "David, legally speaking, can an HOA president prevent emergency vehicles from entering during a medical emergency?" He got serious, shifting from neighbor mode to officer mode. Absolutely not. What Beverly did, if it happened like you said, that's obstruction of emergency services. It's a serious charge, Ben. Class C felony in this state. But you'd need solid evidence, video, multiple witnesses, proof of intent to obstruct, not just confusion or poor judgment. I showed him Beverly's violation letter. He whistled low. This is something else. She's basically documenting her own crime here, admitting she knew it was an emergency but chose to enforce HOA rules instead. After Torres left, I sat alone in my helicopter at the hospital landing pad, my quiet refuge after tough shifts. The rhythmic sound of helicopters landing and taking off was like meditation. I read Beverly's letter again. Each word hit like a physical blow. Dangerous precedent for emergency protocols, as if saving a life could ever be a crime. The phrase dangerous precedent for emergency protocols kept leaping off the page. The woman actually believed that saving a life was somehow setting a bad example for the neighborhood. That's when I remembered the day I moved into Willowbrook Estates. Dr. Rose had welcomed me with homemade cookies and shared the story of her grandson Tommy, how, 20 years ago, he'd survived a horrific school bus accident thanks to a helicopter pilot who made an emergency landing in a field to get him to the hospital faster. That pilot saved my boy's life, she had said. Tommy was a doctor now because someone had been brave enough to break the rules when it mattered most. The irony hit me hard. Here I was, a helicopter pilot myself, forced to carry Dr. Rose 400 meters through the rain because someone cared more about rules than saving lives. Later that night, while taking out my trash, I noticed something odd. Beverly's bin was already at the curb, even though trash pickup wasn't until Thursday. Call it paranoia or just curiosity, but I decided to take a closer look. What I found made my hands shake with anger. Mixed in with her usual garbage were several torn-up letters, handwritten but not completely destroyed. Carefully, I gathered the pieces and went inside to piece them together like a jigsaw puzzle. One letter, written in shaky handwriting on floral stationery, caught my eye. When assembled, it read, "Mom, please stop this madness before you lose everything else. Signed, Madison." Another fragment said, "Therapy might help before it's too late. Still love you, but I can't watch." The letters spent 6 months and painted a heartbreaking picture of someone desperately trying to reach Beverly, someone who knew exactly what she'd become. Who was Madison, and why was Beverly throwing away letters from someone who clearly cared? I made copies of everything, photographed the fragments, and started formulating a plan. Beverly had declared war on me, but she'd made a critical mistake. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I'd spent 4 tours in Afghanistan learning how to fight enemies who used psychological warfare and hidden tactics. Beverly might run Willowbrook Estates, but she'd never faced an opponent who could think 3 moves ahead. The disciplinary hearing was in 2 days. I was going to make sure it was a day Beverly Hutchinson would never forget. The Willowbrook Estates Community Center had never seen anything like the chaos that unfolded that Friday evening. What was supposed to be a routine disciplinary hearing turned into a mix of courtroom drama and neighborhood uprising. 45 residents crammed into a room meant for 20, standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. Word about the Dr. Rose incident had spread fast, and people had opinions, strong opinions. At the head table sat Beverly like a queen holding court, flanked by the other HOA board members who grew increasingly uneasy as the crowd grew. She wore her most authoritative navy blue suit, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun that made her look like a strict high school principal ready to expel half the student body. In front of her lay a thick folder labeled Carter Violations, a laptop, and a tablet showing what I assumed was her evidence against me. "This hearing will come to order," Beverly announced, slamming a wooden gavel, one she'd clearly bought just for the occasion. "We are here tonight to address the serious violations committed by Mr. Benjamin Carter on the night of October 15th. Mr. Carter, you stand accused of breaking and entering, destruction of property, threatening a board member, violating noise ordinances, and undermining the security protocols of our community." She paused dramatically, scanning the room like a prosecutor addressing a jury. "These are not minor infractions. These violations strike at the very heart of what makes Willowbrook Estates the premier residential community it is today." Beverly launched into her presentation of evidence. First, She played security camera footage from the front gate, a footage she had edited to show me aggressively confronting her and making threatening gestures. The video conveniently started after Dr. Rose had collapsed and ended before the ambulance arrived, making me look like an angry neighbor harassing a board member for no reason. Next came an audio recording from her phone, also carefully edited to make my voice sound threatening and unreasonable. As you can see and hear, Beverly continued, Mr. Carter became violent and abusive when I simply reminded him of our community guidelines. He then proceeded to break into Dr. Bennett's home, causing property damage that our insurance will have to cover. She clicked to the next slide, photos of the broken window and scattered glass. This kind of reckless behavior puts our entire community at risk. What if there had been children nearby? What if his actions triggered a security alert that diverted resources from a real emergency? Then came the character witnesses, 3 residents handpicked by Beverly to support her story. Mrs. Gladys Murphy, Beverly's next-door neighbor and biggest supporter, stood and read her prepared statement. Mrs. Hutchinson has always been professional and courteous in her duties. That night, she was simply doing her job, protecting our community from chaos and disorder. Mrs. Gladys Murphy declared, Mr. Carter's behavior was absolutely unacceptable. Then Mr. Harold Westbrook, a recently retired accountant who'd been locked in his own feud with Beverly over lawn maintenance rules, surprised everyone by defending her. Later, I learned Beverly had suddenly approved his request for a fence height variance just days before the hearing, a convenient favor, no doubt. When it was my turn, I stood calmly and scanned the room. Neighbors I'd shared barbecues with, whose kids I'd helped fix bicycles for, people who had welcomed me to Willowbrook Estates just 6 months ago. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here to insult your intelligence by pretending this hearing is about HOA violations, I began. This is about power, control, and what happens when rules are placed above human lives. I started presenting my evidence. Mrs. Hutchinson claims she's protecting our community. But how many of you know about the Miller family who lived on Oak Street until last year? A few hands went up. How about the Johnsons, the Patels, the O'Connors, or, most recently, the Washingtons? More hands rose, and I could see the pieces starting to fit. All these families left Willowbrook Estates after disputes with the HOA board. All sold their homes below market value, and in 3 cases, those homes were purchased by people connected to current board members. Whispers and murmurs filled the room. Beverly banged her gavel frantically. This is irrelevant to tonight's proceedings, she insisted. But I pressed on, my voice rising over the noise. I have documented evidence of email manipulation, official HOA communications sent through personal accounts and then deleted to erase the digital trail. I have bank records showing unusual transfers from the home maintenance fund into personal accounts tied to board members. That's when things took a dramatic turn. As Beverly struggled to regain control, the community center door opened, and a young woman entered. Tall, with the same silver hair as Beverly's but worn long and natural, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had made a difficult decision to do the right thing. Probably in her mid-20s, professionally dressed but with a sadness that suggested she wished she could be anywhere else, she spoke clearly despite the nervousness in her eyes. I'm sorry to interrupt. My name is Madison Hutchinson, and I believe I can provide important context for tonight's proceedings. Beverly went pale, her confident mask cracking. Madison, you don't belong here. You don't understand what's happening, she spat. But Madison was already walking to the front, placing a heavy box of documents on the table with a loud thud. I understand perfectly well, Mom, she said, and the room fell silent. I understand you've been using your position as HOA president to harass and intimidate families until they leave. I understand you've been embezzling money from the community fund to pay your legal fees and personal expenses. And I understand you've been manipulating email systems to cover your tracks, because you taught me those tricks when I was in college. Madison pulled out a stack of papers. I'm a licensed social worker, and I've seen what happens when people abuse positions of authority. I've spent the last 2 years trying to help you get therapy, trying to convince you to step down before you hurt more people. But when I heard about what happened to Dr. Bennett, I knew I couldn't stay silent. She handed copies of documents to several residents in the front row. These are bank statements showing $15,000 transferred from the home maintenance fund to Mom's personal account over the past 18 months. These are email logs proving she's been intercepting and altering official communications. And these are legal documents showing HOA funds used to pay for personal attorneys in unrelated cases. Chaos erupted. Residents stood shouting, demanding answers. Beverly tried to keep control, but her hands shook and her voice faltered. This is a setup. My own daughter is being manipulated by this man to destroy me. She pointed a trembling finger at me. You planned this, didn't you, Carter? You couldn't win fair and square, so you turned my own child against me. Madison stepped forward, looking her mother directly in the eyes for the first time since arriving. Mom, I didn't come here to destroy you. I came to save you from yourself. Don't you see what you've become? You've lost Dad, you've lost me, and now you're losing the respect of an entire community because you can't let go of control. Tears streamed down Madison's face, but her voice stayed steady. My voice stayed steady. I love you, Mom, but I won't stand by and watch you hurt innocent people anymore. The vote was decisive, 38 in my favor, 7 against. With 2 abstentions, Beverly's violations were dismissed, but the board announced a full investigation into the HOA's finances and procedures. As people filed out of the community center, many stopped to shake my hand or offer support, but my eyes stayed fixed on Beverly, sitting alone at the head table. Madison leaned in, trying to speak softly to her mother. Finally, Beverly stood, gathering her papers with trembling hands. She looked around the room one last time, and for a brief moment, I saw not the ruthless HOA president, but a broken, lonely woman who had lost everything she cared about. This isn't over, Carter, she said quietly as she passed by me. You think you've won, but you have no idea what I'm capable of. Madison followed her out, pleading, Mom, please let me help you. 2 days later, I found out exactly what Beverly was capable of. When I checked my email, my whole world flipped upside down. Madison had been right. Confronting Beverly publicly only made her more dangerous. What she did next pushed me to the limits of my patience and forced me to choose between being a good neighbor and the warrior I'd been trained to be. 48 hours after the hearing, I woke up to 17 missed calls, 43 texts, and an inbox flooded with messages. The subject lines alone made my stomach turn. Warning, dangerous resident, protect your children. The truth about Benjamin Carter. My hands shook as I opened the first email, sent from the official HOA address to every resident in Willowbrook Estates at 3:47 a.m. It was a masterpiece of character assassination disguised as a community safety alert. According to Beverly's message, I was a disturbed individual with a history of violence and inappropriate behavior around minors. She claimed my military service had left me psychologically unstable and prone to aggression. The most damaging accusation, I had been seen behaving suspiciously around neighborhood children, with several families allegedly raising concerns. To prove her claims, Beverly included photos and pictures of me helping 10-year-old Emma Morrison fix her bicycle chain, edited to look like I was inappropriately touching her, images of me teaching Frank and Carol's nephew to operate my drone, cropped to appear suspicious, even a snapshot from the neighborhood barbecue, where I was giving the Patel twins flying lessons in my flight simulator, taken from an angle that made it look secretive and inappropriate. The worst part wasn't the lies, it was how fast people believed them. By 8 a.m., neighbors were crossing the street to avoid me. Emma Morrison, who used to wave excitedly whenever she saw me, hid behind her mother when I walked by. The mailmen wouldn't meet my eyes. Even Carol and Frank, who had defended me just days earlier, suddenly found reasons to avoid their front yard whenever I was outside. It was like watching a community I'd grown to love turn hostile and alien overnight. At work, my supervisor called me into his office. Mike Rodriguez had been my boss for 3 years, and I'd never seen him look so uncomfortable. Ben, I hate to bring this up, but HR has received some calls about you, allegations of inappropriate behavior, he said. I don't believe any of it, but I have to tell you, they're required to conduct an investigation. The room spun as Mike explained I was being placed on administrative leave pending the review. 3 tours in Afghanistan, hundreds of lives saved, and now, I was sitting in an office being told I might lose my job because some bitter woman couldn't handle losing control. That afternoon, I drove to the hospital helipad, a place where I had often found peace in the rhythmic sounds of rotor blades and medical helicopters. I sat in the cockpit of our backup aircraft, scrolling through the emails on my phone, each message like a dagger in my chest. These were people who had shared meals with me, trusted me with their children's safety, welcomed me into their lives. How had one email erased 6 months of trust and connection? Memories from Afghanistan flooded back, not the heroic missions or camaraderie, but the darker moments every veteran carries. I thought of Sergeant Williams, falsely accused of misconduct by a local informant. The investigation dragged on for months while he was shunned by his unit. He couldn't bear the isolation and suspicion. One night, alone in his barracks, Williams put his service weapon to his head and pulled the trigger. He left a note, saying he couldn't live with people thinking he was a monster when all he ever wanted was to protect them. Now I understood how Williams felt, how the helplessness, the rage, the unbearable weight of false accusations you can't defend against, because proving a negative is nearly impossible. How do you prove you're not a predator? How do you convince people that photographs taken out of context don't tell the real story? How do you fight an enemy who's willing to destroy your entire life over a neighborhood dispute? Sitting in that helicopter cockpit, staring out at the city I devoted my career to protecting, I had a moment of crystal clarity. Beverly hadn't just attacked me, she'd weaponized the one thing no man can recover from: accusations involving children. She knew once that seed was planted, it would grow like a cancer, eating away everything I'd built. Even if I could prove my innocence, the whispers would never stop. Some neighbors would always wonder, always watch me with suspicious eyes. That's when Dr. Rose appeared at the helipad. She'd been released from the hospital the day before, looking frail but determined as she approached the helicopter. "Ben, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice weak but purposeful. I helped her into the passenger seat, and we sat together in the quiet of the aircraft. "I know what Beverly's done, and I know it's all lies, but I also know something about you that might change how you handle this." Dr. Rose reached into her purse and pulled out an old, yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Hero Pilot Saves Bus Crash Victims." Below was a photo of a younger me next to a medical helicopter. Beside me stood a small boy with his arm in a sling, smiling despite the bandages on his face. "This is my grandson Tommy," Dr. Rose said softly. "You saved his life 20 years ago when their school bus crashed on Interstate 75. The other helicopters couldn't land because of the terrain, but you put your aircraft down in a field that everyone said was too small, too dangerous." I stared at the photo. Memories flooded back: how the bus crash, the injured children, the impossible landing zone. It had been one of those split-second decisions where training and instinct take over. I'd never known what happened to most of those kids afterward. "Tommy's a doctor now because of you," Dr. Rose continued. "He works in pediatric emergency medicine, saving children's lives every day because someone gave him a chance to grow up. When I told him what Beverly did and what she's accusing you of, he said something I want to share." Dr. Rose's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she recited her grandson's words. "Grandma, that pilot didn't just save my body that day, he saved my future. If someone's trying to destroy him with lies about hurting children, then they're attacking everything he represents. Someone needs to remind the world who Benjamin Carter really is." She folded the clipping and pressed it into my hands. "Ben, you have a choice. You can let Beverly destroy you with her lies, or you can remind everyone why heroes sometimes have to come from above." That evening, I made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Jenny at dispatch. "Jenny, I need to register an emergency training drill for Monday morning. Location: Willowbrook Estates Golf Course." She was silent for a long moment before asking, "Ben, are you sure about this? After everything that's happened?" I looked out my window at the neighborhood that had turned against me and made my decision. "Jenny, it's time to show this community what real authority looks like." The second call was to Madison Hutchinson. When she answered, I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "Madison, this is Ben Carter. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Is your mother capable of stopping, or has she gone too far to turn back?" Madison was silent for so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. Carter, my mother doesn't know how to lose. She's spent so much of her life controlling others. She's forgotten how to control herself. What she did to you at those emails, that's not the end. She'll keep going until someone stops her or until she destroys herself." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about choices and consequences. In Afghanistan, we had a saying, "Sometimes you have to rain down justice from above." Tomorrow, Beverly Hutchinson and the residents of Willowbrook Estates were going to learn exactly what that meant. The question wasn't whether I could stop Beverly, it was whether I could stop myself from going too far in the process. As I drifted off to sleep, I heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors, and for the first time in days, I smiled. Monday morning dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect October days when the air is sharp, and the sky so blue it almost hurts to look at. At 7:45 a.m., the residents of Willowbrook Estates went about their routines, walking dogs, collecting newspapers, starting commutes. Beverly Hutchinson stood in her perfectly manicured front yard, wearing her signature power suit and watering her prize-winning rose bushes with the same precision she applied to neighborhood domination. Then they heard it. At first, a distant thumping, like hammering on a roof several blocks away, but the sound grew louder, more distinct, the unmistakable rhythmic whop-whop of helicopter rotors cutting through the morning air. People stopped, shading their eyes against the sun, looking up to find the source. Beverly paused mid-watering, a frown creasing her flawless face as she scanned the sky. The helicopter appeared from the east, flying low and steady, its red end as the helicopter came into view, its red and white medical markings sharp against the clear blue sky. It was a Bell 429, the very model I'd been flying for the last 12 years, heading straight for Willowbrook Estates. The noise grew louder, almost deafening, as the aircraft approached. One by one, neighbors began stepping outside, pointing skyward, whispering with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. This wasn't the usual distant hum of a medevac rushing to a hospital. This helicopter was coming right to their neighborhood. I guided the chopper low over the main street, executing a flawless landing pattern I'd drilled 1,000 times in training and emergencies alike. Soon, the entire neighborhood was gathered outside, drawn like moths to the spectacle of a medical helicopter descending into their suburban calm. Beverly stood frozen in her perfectly manicured front yard, hose still spraying water onto the sidewalk, her face a mix of confusion and dawning horror. The golf course, pristine, green, and fiercely protected by the HOA, was her pride and joy, the jewel of her little kingdom. And now, there I was, about to land right in the middle of it. I touched down with textbook precision, the rotor wash scattering blades of grass and dust, sending the onlookers shielding their eyes. Nearly 60 or 70 people surrounded the edges of the golf course, their expressions ranging from amazement to shock. Beverly pushed her way through the crowd, her face flushed with anger, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering under the weight of what was happening. I stepped out of the helicopter, dressed in full flight gear, my EMS pilot uniform sharp and professional. Despite the chaos I'd stirred, my movements were calm and deliberate. But then something unexpected happened. My phone, set to live stream the landing, revealed over 200 viewers watching live, numbers climbing fast as neighbors and online strangers shared the feed. "Good morning, Willowbrook Estates," I said into the camera, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. "I'm Captain Benjamin Carter, emergency medical pilot for the county. Today, I'm conducting an emergency response demonstration for our community." Beverly reached the edge of the golf course, screaming something lost in the helicopter noise, but her body language spoke volumes as she was unraveling completely. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, stepping closer, her voice sharp and furious. "This is private property. You can't land that thing here. I'm calling the police." Ignoring her, I continued, speaking directly to the live-streamed viewers now swelling past 500. "Just 48 hours ago, residents here received emails with false accusations about me, sent from the HOA's official address at 3:47 a.m., when no reasonable business should be conducted." The crowd pressed closer, phones raised to record everything. I saw neighbors who had avoided me these past days looking confused and ashamed as the truth started to dawn. "Ladies and gentlemen, Emergency response protocols exist to save lives, not to be twisted into weapons for personal vendettas. When ambulances are blocked during emergencies, when lies are spread to destroy reputations, that's not protection. That's destruction. Beverly spun around, pointing fingers wildly at anyone nearby. You are all conspiring against me. This is my domain. I am the law here. Her desperate claims of authority contrasted sharply with the clear unraveling of her control. It was becoming obvious to the neighbors this was what real instability looked like. Then Officer Torres arrived, his patrol car rolling up with flashing lights but no siren. He stepped out slowly, taking in the scene with the calm, steady gaze of someone used to neighborhood disputes and emotional breakdowns. "Mrs. Hutchinson," he said firmly but kindly, "I need you to step back and calm down." Beverly's meltdown continued, but I turned back to the live stream. This demonstration is fully authorized under Federal Aviation Administration guidelines for emergency training exercises. All proper notifications were filed with air traffic control. This is legal and necessary. The viewer count passed 1,000, comments flooding in faster than I could read. People nationwide were watching a suburban drama unfold live. Then, unexpectedly, Madison Hutchinson appeared, striding across the golf course with determined purpose. Her face was set in hard lines, carrying the weight of a tough decision. Beverly's rage shifted suddenly to panic. "Madison, what are you doing here? They've manipulated you against me," she cried. Madison walked straight to her mother, ignoring the crowd, the cameras, the helicopter focused only on the broken woman before her. "Mom, it's over," she said quietly, her voice clear in the hush. "The lies, the manipulation, the power games, they're over. Let me help you." Beverly glanced between her daughter, the neighbors, and me in my pilot uniform. Something inside her finally broke. She sank to her knees on the immaculate grass, sobbing like a child who'd lost everything. The live stream had topped 2,000 viewers when I ended it with one simple message: sometimes justice comes from unexpected places. Sometimes, the only way to clear the air is to rise above the conflict. Thank you for watching. Remember, communities are built on trust, honesty, and looking out for one another. I powered down my phone and walked over to Madison and Beverly, hoping this was finally the end of our suburban war. But as I would soon learn, dramatic helicopter landings and public revelations don't instantly heal the wounds caused by lies and betrayal. The hardest choice was still ahead: whether to break Beverly completely or help her rebuild what she had lost. The aftermath spread fast through the neighborhood and online. Within 24 hours, the live stream had over 50,000 views. News outlets labeled it everything from suburban justice from above to "Ho Karen meets her match." My phone rang non-stop with interview requests, and neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid me were suddenly knocking to apologize and shake my hand. But one image wouldn't leave my mind: Beverly Hutchinson, kneeling in the middle of that golf course, sobbing as her daughter comforted her. That moment haunted me because I recognized something in her breakdown, something I'd seen before. In Afghanistan, we sometimes encountered enemy fighters who weren't hardened terrorists or true believers, just broken people pushed to extremes by circumstances beyond their control. The hardest part of war isn't defeating your enemies, it's deciding what to do with them afterward. That Tuesday afternoon, I sat in my helicopter on the hospital helipad, scrolling through hundreds of social media comments. People were demanding blood. They wanted Beverly arrested, prosecuted, destroyed, and made an example of for every tyrant in America. "Burn her down," one comment read. "Make her pay for every family she drove away," said another. The anger was understandable, even justified, but it reminded me of something from my second tour in Afghanistan. We'd captured an insurgent leader responsible for deadly IED attacks that killed American soldiers. The entire unit wanted revenge, wanted to see him suffer. But our commanding officer, a wise colonel named Patterson, pulled me aside and said something I never forgot: anyone can destroy an enemy. It takes real strength to break the cycle of destruction. That insurgent leader eventually turned around and became one of our most valuable intelligence assets, helping save dozens of lives. That evening, Madison called me. Her voice was exhausted, drained far from the strength she'd shown during the confrontation. "Mr. Carter, I need to talk to you about my mother. She's in a bad place, worse than I've seen in years. The media attention, the legal fallout, the complete collapse of everything she thought she controlled. It's broken something in her that might not be fixable. She told me Beverly barely spoke, had locked herself in her house, refusing food or calls. What do you want from me, Madison? I asked. Your mother tried to destroy my life, she said quietly. She called me a predator, tried to get me fired, turned the whole community against me with lies. There was a long silence before she answered. I know what she did was unforgivable, but she's still my mother and she's mentally ill. The woman who blocked that ambulance and sent those emails a broken bar, that's not who she used to be. She's lost everything, drowning in bitterness. On Thursday morning, I requested a meeting with Officer Torres and the district attorney. I told them that while Beverly needed to be held accountable, I didn't want to see her destroyed. She had abused her position, obstructed emergency services, embezzled HOA funds, and waged a defamation campaign against me. But I believed justice could be done without ruining what was left of her life. Torres was skeptical but willing to listen. My proposal was simple. Beverly would resign all HOA positions immediately, repay embezzled funds with interest, attend mandatory anger management and psychological counseling, and issue a public apology admitting her wrongdoing and harm caused. In return, I wouldn't pursue civil litigation and would recommend leniency in criminal proceedings. This wasn't mercy for its own sake, it was a practical way to repair damage without creating more casualties. Saturday afternoon, I met Beverly at Madison's apartment. She looked 10 years older than a week ago, hair unkempt, once powerful suits replaced by a simple sweater and jeans, eyes hollow like someone who had lost everything she thought she held. When I entered, she couldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at her folded hands. Mrs. Hutchinson, I began, I'm here to offer you a choice. We can go to court, air all of this publicly, and let the system decide your fate. Or we can handle this privately, with conditions to ensure it never happens again. Tears streamed down her face. Why? She whispered. After everything I did to you, a broken bar, why would you give me a choice? I thought of Colonel Patterson and second chances, about breaking cycles of destruction, because I've seen what happens when good people are pushed to terrible acts. And I've seen what happens when destruction meets more destruction. You made serious mistakes, but you're not beyond redemption. Your daughter still believes in you. Maybe that should count for something. At the next home meeting, Beverly stood before a packed room. Her voice trembled as she read a prepared statement acknowledging she had abused her position, deliberately obstructed emergency medical services, and spread false accusations out of spite and revenge. I became everything I once stood against, she said, tears flowing freely. I hurt people who trusted me, and I nearly cost a wonderful woman her life, all because of my need for control. Dr. Rose, quietly watching from the back, then stood up. I forgive Mrs. Hutchinson, but more importantly, I thank Mr. Carter for showing us that strength isn't about control. Real strength is knowing when to show mercy. The room erupted, not just for Beverly's apology, but for the hope that healing was possible after such deep division. 6 months later, Willowbrook Estates had settled into a new normal. Dr. Rose was elected HOA president, championing transparency and community over rigid enforcement. Beverly completed her counseling and quietly volunteered at a food bank, working with Madison to rebuild their relationship step by step. She still lived in the neighborhood. While some residents remained wary, most saw that she was fundamentally different from the woman who once held them hostage with her need for control. As for me, I kept my promise about helicopter landings on the golf course every few Sunday mornings. When the weather was right and the aircraft was available for training, I'd bring it down on that pristine green space, not just as a drill, but as a reminder that some of the most important rules are the unwritten ones about humanity and respect. Beverly would watch from her front yard, no longer with anger or resentment, but with something close to gratitude. The last time someone asked me about the whole incident, I said this: you never know when you might be someone's emergency landing. You never know when breaking the rules might save a life. And you never know when mercy might be the strongest weapon you have. Beverly taught me that enemies can become allies, broken people can heal, and sometimes the greatest power lies in choosing not to use it. Just 3 minutes, that's all it took to turn my entire world upside down. Only moments earlier, the self-declared queen of our neighborhood had physically blocked an ambulance trying to reach our neighbor who was on the brink of death. And just 3 minutes after that, I had landed a medical helicopter right smack in the middle of their precious golf course. The look on her face, absolutely priceless. What happened next? Let's just say justice came literally from above.